رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم سيدي. فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين بارد الخلائق أجمعين سيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا مولانا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد ولبيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين اصطفاهم الله أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن يبتغي غير الإسلام دينا فلن يقبل منه. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My respected scholars, my respected elders, brothers and sisters, Abidjal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to start off by saying it's an honor to be here. This is my first time in New York. I would like to thank the mosque and the committee members for having me. Please give them a lot of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa Rahman. I start in the name of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the omniscient, the omnipotent. All praise is due to Allah for giving us the ability to exist. Not only do we have the ability to exist, but in all actuality, we have the ability to interact with our existence. It's quite a phenomenal existence if we think about it. A very, very long time ago, human beings used to think that we were the center of everything. Our existence, our earth, was the center of the whole world. And our myopic visions and understandings of the world have changed ever since that time. It's quite phenomenal to say that from that time, from way back then, our advancements, our scientific advancements have helped us understand the scope whereby which we live. That no longer is everything surrounding us, no longer are we the center of everything and everything goes around us, but there's something much greater at stake in this reality which we live in today. That it's not that we are the center of the world, but that we are a small speck in this whole reality and this whole existence. And that's why a lot of the times a question comes up, which is, what's all this about? What's our existence about? What are we here to do? And what are we doing here? Before, when we used to think that the universe was rotating around us, it was easy to look at ourselves and say, well, we are the center of everything, and hence we are the center of the universe, and we are the purpose. Everything rotates around us. But now that science has advanced and things have moved forward, and we look at the reality that's around us, and we're slowly coming to understand that the reality is so contrary to what we used to know. All of a sudden, things have changed, and we are not the center of everything anymore. Rather, we're one small speck in this whole existence and this reality. As time advanced, we started realizing, well, we are not the center of everything. There are things out there which are much greater than what we are. And we are but a speck in this greater reality. And what that's done to our understanding of the world is it's made us more cognizant and understanding that there are so many unanswered questions out there. And hence, when we examine the Quranic context, it's quite interesting to note that the Quranic context is very specific in asking questions and trying to get down to the bottom of what this reality is all about. For example, when we look at the Quranic story, and this is the theme that I'm going to be using for the next 2 nights, this specific story in the Quran, because I feel like there's a reality which the story tackles, which is very often missed, and if understood, can shine a light, a whole different light and a scope to the reality which we exist in. When we look at the Quranic context, and we look at the story of the angels and Allah Azza wa Jalla and Shaitan, when Allah decides to create Adam, and He says that I will be creating someone who will be a Khalifa on the earth, the immediate response of the angel is that, oh Allah, will you now put someone on earth who will make evil, create havoc, and reap bloodshed? Within the context of the story, then you have the whole Shaitan incident which happens, which I'm going to get to tomorrow, because there's quite an interesting reality about what submission means within the context of the story. But within this very main frame, there's quite a message to be understood, which is at times totally missed. When Allah decides and makes a decision, what's the standpoint that you and I take to? Do I simply say, because God or Allah has dictated or mandated, I now take a back seat and say to myself, I've understood everything and there's no need for me to question the reality which is around me? Or is there a God-given right to me that I have the right to question and ask and nitpick about even the smallest details of any decisions made in this universe? And when we examine the story, when Allah makes a decision, it's quite interesting to say that the response of the angels is an interesting response. Because Allah does not say to them, now, if you look at the comparison here, you have angels which have worshipped Allah for a very long time. Now mind you, compared to the infinite knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal, these angels are very, very pesky or meager, very small. It's kind of comparing a number like 1 to infinity. There's a huge gap and a huge difference between them. And in this understanding of the story, Allah does not shun them away and say, I've made a decision and now you can't ask me any questions about the decision that I've made. But there's a clear understanding that Allah replies to them and talks to them and says to them, إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, I know that which you do not know. He doesn't say to them, don't ask questions or don't come to me with any sort of difference to what I have decided. But He addresses their understanding and He addresses their questions. Now, mind you, the scope that I'm trying to bring here is it's a different dogma. Because the angels, on one level, have worshipped Allah for thousands of years. On that note, they have seen Allah create Adam. They've seen miracles. You have an angel like Jibreel, for example, who is the wahi of Allah Azza wa Jal. He takes any information that Allah relays to the Prophet and relays it through a means which is Jibreel. Some of the angels like Mikael are angels which are in charge of the hellfire, for example. You've got Israel, who's in charge of death. These angels have seen miracles. They have seen many different tasks being done. And at this understanding, they still question the decision which is made by Allah Azza wa Jal, which is to create a human being to be put on earth. Now that's a very big and bold step. That's a bold step to be taken. And the question that we ask, which opens our discussion here, is if the angels who have worshipped Allah for so long, if the angels who have taken such steps towards Allah Azza wa Jal, in that reality are able to question Allah, or question any decision or movement in our existence, then what's my position and your position in the questioning scheme? And how many questions should we be asking, and what kind of things should we be asking? Because in all reality, the system of Islam was a system completely built on this idea of logical reasoning. Because when we come to commemorate the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, when we come to commemorate the death of Rasulullah, the concept and idea of religion is a very big idea. And I'd like to tackle the understanding of religion in these next 2 days. Because when we look at the society that the messenger made, it was a society which was completely open to any sort of questioning and ideology. Meaning the system wasn't built as an imposition upon the Arabians, but it was a system whereby their inner reality and their inner questioning phase was allowed and fed and accepted within that society and was never put down. If we go back to some of the earliest texts by the Prophet, you might think to yourself, well, what were some of the earliest things that the Prophet said to his people? Was it that, O people of Arabia, I'd like you to pray? Or was it, O people of Arabia, I'd like you to fast? Or was it, O people of Arabia, I'd like you to come give zakat, or to come give siyam, or to put on hijab? On the contrary, if you go back to some of the oldest things that the messenger said to the people was, O people of Arabia, reflect for 1 hour and ask questions. It's better than 70 years of dry worship. The very inner conscience of questioning among the people was accepted, was adopted, was allowed to flourish, and was never submerged and put down. There were some of the most stupid questions which would come to the Prophet, but he would still accept and answer the questions. Basic example is one man would come to the messenger and say to him, Ya Rasulullah, do you like camels? What's your position on camels? He says, well, you know, they're animals. We use them for different things. He says, just tell me, if you like them, I'll follow the religion of Islam. If you don't, I'll go find another religion which protects my camels. To such a level of stupidity, some people would come and ask the Prophet these questions, but he would always answer. The questioning of people was allowed. Their questions were accepted. Their questions on the most basic issues were brought forth, because the messenger realized that religion was not an imposition among the people, but it was an inner reality which was brought out to be understood. See, there's two main different understandings of religion. One understanding is that the human being is created empty, as an empty vessel with nothing inside. And religion is meant to take the human being and to make the person good. That's one understanding. The second understanding is that no, the human being is created good, and religion is there to aid the individual reach a higher level of existence. And the example that we give is this. We can go to a person and say to them that you are a charitable person. That's one way to look at a person. Another way to see them is to say to them, no, you are not charitable. Let religion help you and make you charitable. The third view is to say, no, you are a good person. Let religion help you become more charitable than you already are. There is no assumption that a person is evil and religion is now to make them good. But there is a flourishing system from inside which religion is meant to bring out. And the Prophet was meant, and when he was brought down, was meant to tackle this inner reality that the people had. He knew this inner reality which make the ultimate change in Arabia. Let's give a brief example of this. If we look at the story of Ammar ibn Yasir, and his mother Sumayya and his father Yasir, you'd find that this very questioning phase and this very investigative phase of starting to question everything that's around them brought them to the religion of Islam and gave them the honor of being the first martyrs in the religion. One day Ammar ibn Yasir walks into the house, and as he's walking inside, he bumps a statue which was next to the door. The statue falls on the ground. His mother Sumayya looks at him and says, Ammar, what are you doing? The statue fell. Pick the statue back up. And Ammar looks at her and says to her, Mother, the statue which can't help itself, which is on the floor, can never help Ammar. How can it help me in any way? It's on the ground, it can't help me. And she looks at him, she says, Ammar, this logic is very new to me. Where'd you get this from? He says to her, there's a man by the name of Muhammad who's preaching us and giving to us the new message. She says to him, what new message did he bring today? He says to her, the verse which was revealed today was Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. When the young child will ask on the day of judgment, for what reason was I killed? This verse was revealed. Sumayya, the mother of Ammar, when she heard this verse, immediately steps out of the room crying. And Ammar looks at his father, he says to him, Father, to Yasir, did I say anything wrong? Did I offend her? He says to him, Ammar, no. But you have to know that your mother was the 13th child. 12 of the children before her, her sisters, were buried before she was born. So what had happened is, and sometimes honestly, the story is not, the horrendous way they would kill children is, they wouldn't simply create a grave. But I've read in certain narrations that they would actually dig a very long hole. And they would throw the child in this hole in such a way where when the child hits the bottom, every bone in the body would break. It was just a horrendous way in killing children. And there's a whole tribal reason why they do that. It's not justified, but there's a reason behind that. And when he said this to him, he says to him that your grandfather had 12 daughters before your mother. Those 12 daughters, when they were being buried one by one, your grandfather, the 12th daughter, she stuck her head out of the grave. And and from that position, when he saw her, his heart broke and said, the next daughter that I have, I'm not going to bury her. That next daughter was who? Was Sumayyah. When Sumayyah goes back into the room, ideally, she then sees the Messenger of Allah. She accepts the religion of Islam. And from that state, who are the first two martyrs in the religion of Islam? Sumayyah and Yasir. In this position, mind you, she was never brought forward to the idea of prayer. She never understood the idea of fasting. Zakat wasn't instituted at that point. But there was some inner conscience which brought this Arabian society towards a greater reality. That conscience came from inside. Now when Allah in the Quran says to the Messenger of Allah, He says, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى, remind them. The question that we ask is, what's He to remind? Is it something new to remind? Because you can't remind someone of something that's new. What Allah is referring to is there's an inner goodness which exists in the Arabian society, and on the human scope, this inner goodness is what religion speaks to. And hence what the Messenger says when Allah says to the Messenger, remind them, He is saying to him, speak to the goodness which is inside of them, which exists, but has been clouded by the way that they are living. It's not that there's no good in that society, but there is some sort of cloud upon that society which needs to be removed and to let their inner goodness shine. And hence the Quran always praises the goodness of the individual. Because mind you, the Arabian society, if you look at it from a very geographic perspective, was never colonized by the Byzantine nor the Persian Empire. They were an empire which was alone. And the reason for that was that, quite frankly, nobody was ever interested in conquering the Arabians because they had nothing. There was no system for them to live. And when we speak about the Arabian aristocrats, it's quite comical to say that they are aristocrats compared to each other. Compared to the guy who's got 5 sheep, 200 sheep is very aristocratic. But compared to the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, they had very little, almost nothing. And when the Messenger came and takes this society, which was not colonized because there was no interest in any part of it, and changes it and brings it to such a greater reality and makes it such a better community, this isn't simply because the religion of Islam was brought down, but there is something much deeper at stake here. And there's such a reality which the Messenger saw of what religion was, and it's such an obvious reality, but it's been completely missed. This is what I want to discuss for the next couple of days. What is this religious reality? What is the Islamic reality that we are meant to see? Does it stop at Islam, or is it much greater than simply the banner of Islam? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. When the Messenger came to the Arabian society, the viewpoint of religion was completely different to what we see today. The religion that we know today and the way we describe it and give it to others was completely different to the way that the Messenger saw it, described it, and gave it to people. What I mean by this is when he came to the Arabian society, religion was never an imposition upon the people. Rather, it was a beautiful force of nature brought out from the inside, and it was never instituted as, if you do this, you will reap good, and if you do this, you will reap evil. It was very, very different. What I mean by different is that in our society today, the way we see religion is, I have a checklist or a booklet of check marks or X's. If I do task A, I will get a check mark, a good deed. If I read Nawha, for example, if I read Marcia, I get a checklist, a check of good deeds that I have. If I do something evil, and this is the way that we kind of teach children sometimes, if I do something evil, there is an X next to my name. There is an ideology of an imposition on the individual, that religion is seen as a specific imposition. And a brief example of this is about 2 weeks ago, I was in Dearborn, Michigan, and a young girl comes to me and she was crying. And I said to her, what's wrong? What's going on? This is after I had finished a lecture. He says to me, brother, I've never worn the hijab in my life. I said, okay, and then what's wrong with that? She says, well, I've never worn it. I want to wear it. And I've been approached by many girls, and the things they've said to me have just completely turned me off. I don't want to wear the scarf anymore. And I was looking at her like, what can a Muslim say to you which will make you not want to wear it? She said, you know, some sisters approached me and told me that if I don't put on the scarf, God will hang me by my hair on the day of judgment, and I will be hung to such a level where my body would be fried. She says, I was so scared, I didn't want to approach this anymore. I want to stay away from it. And I looked at her like, wow, when somebody imposed this on you, all of a sudden you start to see it in a different light. Now look at the way that we talk to each other at times, or talk to young children. The way we explain Islam to young children at times is very similar. We look at our son or our daughter and say to them, if you do this, God will give you this. If you don't do this, God will burn you, for example, take you away from this, keep you away from this. As a young child, this is the way I was taught. And a brief example is, when I was in high school, my father would drop me off to high school every single day. He was the one who would, take me from the house and he'd drop me off. And every morning, I got the same lecture from my father. He would lecture me before I got to high school because he knew that high school was very dangerous. He had just moved to America and was deathly scared of everything. To such a level that when we landed in the airport, he says to me, Ali, don't take candy from anyone. Everybody gives drugs in their candy. And I said, Baba, that's not how it works, And after years, I started to realize and understand what this was all about. So he would drop me off next to the high school and he would give me the same lecture every morning. Pretty much the same. He would say to me, Ali, you're in high school. I don't ever want to see you with a girl. I don't want to see you dating either. And I would look at him and say, Baba, why? What's the reason? He says to me, Ali, according to Islam, if a person dates, now this is an example of how we teach our young children religion, and I want to show you how it's taught now and how it was taught by the messenger. He would say to me, if a person does date, if that happens, then what happens is Allah Azza wa Jal punishes them by making them very poor. And I would say to myself, well, I never wanted to be poor. I didn't want my dad to be poor. So throughout my years of high school, I stayed away from this. Like, I have nothing to do with this. Then recently, about a year ago, I moved to Dearborn, Michigan, and I started to drive around in the cities in Detroit, and I started to realize, wow, there's something called teen pregnancy. There's something called children being born and the father's leaving. There's something called a society and a family being torn apart because two people are not committed to children. And from that point I realized that it's not about whether God says it's haram or halal, or whether my father says haram or halal, or whether the Prophet says haram or halal, but there's a reality and a system whereby I live in. If I do certain things, the consequences are going to be reaped right here. I will see them here. And all of a sudden, there is a system of built-in understanding. Because I tell you, that young 5 to 10-year-old, when you tell him, if you do this, God will do this to you, that will work up until the age of 15, 16, 17. But when the child becomes 20 or 25, all of a sudden there has to be a built-in system whereby the person knows, I don't do this act not because God doesn't allow or God allows, but there is a system in place. If I break this, there is consequences which I will see in this world. And the question that I ask myself is this, is if tomorrow we wake up as a community and as a society, and we realize that religion doesn't exist, would we still not drink alcohol? Would we still not kill one another? Would we still be kind to one another? Would we still give to the poor who are needy? Would we give our khums and our zakat because others need it overseas in other areas? Now that's the litmus test for whether we see religion as an imposition or not. Because I remember specifically in my high school years, I had a lot of Muslim friends who would say to me, man, I'm so restricted by religion, I can't do anything. I want to go out and club, but I can't because religion doesn't allow me. And this person has taken religion and seen it as an imposition where it controls their lives. And I hear this a lot of the time from our youth. Man, I wish I was a Christian because they can do everything. They can club, they can party, they can drink alcohol, they can take drugs. I wish I can do that. And the person now, he's so overshadowed by the idea of haram that they don't realize there are self-inflicted wounds when I do this. Because at the end of the day, when we examine the idea of Allah Azza wa Jal, the verse that I started off with, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Those who take other than Islam as a religion, I will not accept from them. When our ulama come to this idea of God accepting or rejecting, they say that God does not accept nor reject deeds. Because Allah, as we know Him, is an infinite Lord, is a Lord which does not need anything. How many times in the Quran does Allah say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Wallahu ghaniyun wa antumul fuqara. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ شَرًّا يَرَى. Allah says in many verses, you are the needy and I am the independent. I am the infinite and you are in need. So this very idea that when I do a good deed, God gives me 10. And when I do a bad deed, God gives me 1. And so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, and mind you, some people actually do this. I was once talking to a young child, and I saw him, playing and pushing with some of his friends, and then he was being very kind and giving others and sharing and stuff like that. And I told him, like, what's going on, You're being kind here, but over here, you're not being kind. What's happening? He says, oh, brother, don't worry about it. I said, why? He said, well, the way God works is God will give me 10 for every good deed that I do. And for every bad deed, God gives me -1. So when I do my mathematics at the end of the day, I'm in the clear with God because I've got more positives and negatives. And I look at the child and say, you know what? I don't blame you for thinking that way because you've been raised to think that way. In reality, in all reality, is God that empty? Well, on the day of judgment, He will sit back and say, you have 10 good deeds and 5 bad deeds, hence you will go to heaven and you will go to hell. Or is it more that God will look at us and say, what have you done to increase your potential as a human being? What have you done to strengthen yourself? Because at the end of the day, it's not about God accepting or not, it's about the growth that I see in my life. That's the main priority that you and I are working for here. Because Allah is independent. God is not needy. But what's in need here is the human element of growth. When I do something, is God up there accepting or rejecting? Or is it more that God has nothing to do with it and it's about my personal growth as a human being? All of a sudden, that starts to get me thinking. Because now are the deeds that I do and the things that I do in my life, do I do them for the sake of God accepting or rejecting? Or do I do them because I find growth in myself and I'm able to grow in some way or some reality? Take an example. Look at this example. Take a person like Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, and this is quite a profound story, to show you that the early companions of the Prophet were not interested in God accepting or rejecting, but they had issues in their society which they needed to find solutions for. The best solution was the religion of Islam. Look at a person like Abu Dhar. One day Abu Dhar was standing, because Abu Dhar comes from a bandit tribe. They were the highwaymen, the tribe which would pillage others. He was standing one day, and he saw a statue which was there, and he was moving, and there was a fox moving next to the statue, and the fox urinates on the statue. And Abu Dhar started thinking, there's something wrong with this picture. My Lord is right there, my God is right there, and it just got urinated on by a fox. There's a serious issue here. And Abu Dhar looks at his companions, look at him and say, Abu Dhar, we see you changing. You're going more towards Muhammad. You're leaning towards Islam. What's going on? He says, and the reason I've become a Muslim is because of the fox that urinated on the statue, which is our God. Abu Dhar here was not inspired that there is a God up there who is accepting or rejecting. Abu Dhar was interested in his personal growth. There are things around me which don't make sense, which need to be changed. And I see a system. I see a human system, which is Islam. A human system which is bringing about change and giving the solutions to society. This system is more fulfilling to me. All of a sudden what matters is not God accepting or rejecting, or how many check marks or pluses I have on my paper. But what's more important is my growth as a human being. I don't stay away from alcohol because God says so. I stay away because I see all of the drunk driving accidents, for example. All of a sudden, there's a new reality to what halal and haram means. Because at times, the issue that arises is we become almost like robotic beings, where we've thrown away the thinking caps, and there's simply a system whereby I believe because God says so. Or I believe because this person says so. Or I believe because that person says so, which is allowed in a frame if we do not understand certain things. But at the end of the day, there is a thinking process. Let me give this brief example. Look at the basic example, which is God's existence. And I want us to see how from the most basic and fundamental human realities, which is God's existence, there is no such idea which are things are just suspended and I am meant to believe with no evidence. But you and I must be engaging and actively participating. Look at the God concept. If you look at the world today, there is this idea of, religious secularism, and there is, for example, academia. We've got academia is fighting this idea that God doesn't exist, and the religious people are saying, no, God exists, faith exists, religion exists, and that's one of the biggest battles today. Specifically within university, our youth within the madrasas and their mosques are very comfortable. But when they go to that first philosophy class, that first logic class, university, all of a sudden certain things are thrown out of the window and everything is suspended and questioned. Every single thing is questioned and suspended. And specifically the idea of God. As children, a lot of the times we're taught that the God concept is something simply put to the side of faith, where you can accept it through faith. There's no logical evidence, but you can accept it through faith. And there is no logical explanation to God's existence. And a lot of the times we throw in the towel to certain things, that this is simply faith-based, and there is no logic to back it up, as if there is things which are logically backed up, and there are things which have no logical deduction behind them. There's simply things which we believe without evidence, and that's called a lack of belief. Now, if you look at something as basic as the God concept, you'll find that it's the most logical discussion which we have. Specifically because, the reason I want to point this out is because we need to shatter this idea that there are things I believe simply because I believe them, and there is no evidence behind it. That's why I think it's quite profound when a great scholar like Shahid al-Sadr comes forward in his book, The Message, the Messenger, the Revealer, and gives the most profound logical proofs to the existence of God. Take one example, which is the inductive method of proving Allah Azza wa Jal. He gives quite a profound example to kind of shatter the stigma that's out there, that the religious people follow God on a very faith-based concept. There is no logical proof to God, but there are certain individuals who reject God, for example, militant atheists, and God to them is of course God doesn't exist. How can you even mingle with something so absurd? And if you examine the idea of God's existence, it is as scientific as any other theory. Matter of fact, the scientific method is used to prove God's existence. And Shahid al-Sadr quite beautifully narrates that in his book. And he gives an example and he says, imagine a human being was to wake up one day and to walk to his mailbox and get to his mailbox and open it up and take out the letter and realize that there's a letter being sent to him by his brother because his brother's name is on the letter. He opens the letter, he unfolds it, he takes it out, and he realizes that there are contexts and situations in the letter which only his brother knows. He looks at the address, it's from his brother. The handwriting is his brother's. There is a birthday gift, for example, only his brother knows that it's his birthday. And Shaykh al-Sadr says, what is the probability of this letter being sent to him by his brother? Well, it's a very high probability because all of the discussions or all of the signs show us that this is the brother's letter, because there are so many signs to show us that. Now, what's the probability that this letter was sent by an alien imposter from outer space? Well, it's a very small possibility because the chances of that are so slim compared to the letter actually being from the brother. Take this a step further. Take it to a scientific concept, for example. Take a look at the theory that we have today, that Earth was at one point part of the sun. Scientists today believe that the Earth was at one point part of the sun, and that we detached from the sun a very long time ago. Now, the way scientists prove this is they never saw this happening, but there is an inductive method of probability used to derive this very law. And the way we do this is we say the elements on the Earth are very similar to the elements on the sun. That's a connection. The axis of the Earth is very similar to the axis of the sun. That's a connection. The Earth at one point was very hot, the same way that the sun is very hot. That's a connection. We take all of these different connections, also the rotating speed of the Earth and the sun is very similar. We take all of these connections, we bring them together and we say, and scientists come together and say, well, there must be a connection here, that our Earth was at one point part of the sun. What's the probability of our Earth being from a very distant sun? Well, that's a very, very small chance. It's a very small probability because we've got a sun which is right here next to us. There is a much more higher probability that it's from this one than a very far one. Take a look at the God concept, which is derived in the very same exact logical method. The God concept states this, that when we look around us, we see so much order, so much creativity, so much balance. Imam al-Sadiq strikes this quite beautifully. He's once standing next to his companion Mufaddal. He says to him, Mufaddal, look at the bird that's flying. And Mufaddal looks up into the air. He says to him, Mufaddal, do you see the way that the wings of the bird are? He says, yeah. He says, they let air pass through them in order for air to go up and down. He says, yes, I see that. He says, this allows the bird to increase and decrease in altitude. He says, Mufaddal, look again. He looks again. He says to him, do you see how the bones of the bird are hollow? He says, yes. He says, that allows the bird to fly so that it's not too heavy. He says to him, Mufaddal, look once again. He looks again. He says to him, do you see how the bird lays its eggs and doesn't carry them in its stomach? He says, yeah. He says, this allows the bird to fly so that it's not too heavy. He says to him, Mufaddal, look once more. He says, yes. He says to him, do you see how the feet of the bird fit perfectly under its wings? He says, yes. He says to him, this allows the bird to fly with as less air resistance as possible. He says to him, Mufaddal, look once more. Now mind you, this is a bird. This isn't the string theory. This isn't the multiverse theory. This isn't cloning or anything else. This is simply examining a bird in our universe. He says to him, look once more. He says, I'm looking at it. He says to him, do you see how the bird has an aerodynamic body, so it flies at fast speeds? He says, yes. He then looks at Mufaddal. He says to him, Mufaddal, do you believe that all of this was brought into existence by an accident? To prove the point and to say that when we look around us and see so much order which exists, when we see so many signs and things put in such a particular place, looking at it very scientifically, what is the probability? What is the probability that our universe was brought into existence through an accident? And Michael Corey, in his book, which discusses the existence of God, he says that the probability of our universe coming into existence through an accident is so minute, the number to represent that is so minute, that it would go around the earth once because of how many zeros it has. That's how small the number is. Now when we look at the God concept and say, does God exist? Is it possible for a God to exist? From looking at it from a very probable explanation, from an inductive method, what is the probability of our universe coming into existence from an accident? Well, the number is so minute that the latter, or the former, which is the existence of a God, must be the explanation. Because other than that, the probability is so minute, who's willing to put their money on that number? It's such a minute number. Now the point why I wanted to bring this forward is to say that something as basic and as fundamental the religion of Islam, before the laws, before anything else, as God's existence, has a very clear logical explanation. And what this tells us is that if God's existence, which is the fundamental concept, has a logical explanation, then what does that say about everything else in my religion? Because at times, young people or youth come forward with questions and they're shunned away. I used to see communities where if a youth came and said, I don't believe in God's existence, he was shunned away. If a youth came forward and said, I have questions about Imam Mahdi's and his existence, does he exist? What's the proof for his existence? He'd be shunned away. If somebody came forward and say, well look, I don't believe in this, or I don't believe in this, or I don't believe in the Quran or prophethood, he'd be shunned away. What we're saying is, instead of shunning people away because of their questions, there has to be a system of logical support. There has to be a support system. Look at the time of the messenger. A man once came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, I drink alcohol. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I drink alcohol. He says to him, and what do you want to do? He says to him, I want to quit, but I don't want to at the same time. He says, why? He says, I can't, because I'm so addicted, I can't quit. He says to him, no problem. What's the next thing that you're addicted to after alcohol? He says to him, dates. He says, fine. Quit dates, come to me after a month and see how that is. He quit the dates. He came to the Messenger of Allah. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I've quit dates and I think now I'm able to quit alcohol because I've built some sort of immunity. The system of the Prophet was not judgmental. It did not look down on people. It did not look down on individuals. Matter of fact, he had to put his hands in the depths of hell and remove certain individuals to help them see the light and understand life the way it works. And you and I come today as a Muslim society, as a Muslim community, at times we say that if only Islam ruled the world, if only Islam was able to shine, if only Islam was given to all of humanity, how we would solve the world's problems. The question that we ask is there a position or room for a Muslim or even a non-Muslim, a Jew, an atheist in our society? I ask you by Allah, is there? Are we accepting of others who are not of the same faith? Can we accept a Jewish person in our masjid or in our lifestyles or in our societies if we had a Muslim community? For goodness sakes, where is our political system? Where is our economic system? As a group and a society who is emerging forward, trying to change the world, at least, we've become a group of reactionary individuals who react to certain problems but are not progressing forward when it comes to finding real life issues. Take a look at example for a basic example. Let's look at heroin addicts in America. A heroin addict in America can safely go to clinics which give them needles, safe needles, clean needles, to shoot drugs. Imagine. These are heroin addicts, individuals who are trying to cure themselves. They give them clean needles to shoot heroin with, so that slowly, things like AIDS and other diseases don't spread, so that this epidemic is completely removed. There is a support system even to individuals who are heroin addicts. I tell you, outside of our doors at times, our youth don't come to the masjid, and we ask, well, why don't they come to the mosque? What's happening? Where are they? And when you mix into the youth circles, there's a lot of discussion that I feel judged, or I feel I need support on an issue which I'm not being supported in. I want to put on the hijab, but I can't. I need support. I want to stop going to the club, but I can't because I need support. I want to stop drinking alcohol, but I can't because I need support. I don't want to smoke weed, for example. Some people tell me, brother, I want to stop, but I can't because I don't find a support system. And instead of being a community, at times, and I'm saying this on a very global scale, the Muslim community at times can be a very judgmental community, to open our hearts and to say the Messenger of Allah came 1400 years ago to a group of people who were in such darkness, put his hands in the depths of hell and helped bring them up. Who am I and who are we to judge certain individuals? This is the same Muslim who might come forward today and say that when Imam Mahdi comes forward, when Imam Mahdi appears, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad, that when Imam Mahdi reappears, he will be very swift in killing the Christians or the Jews. Some people have this idea. Now, if the messenger, which is the grandfather, came as a mercy to the Christians and the Jews, if he came as a mercy to society, if he came to remove any judgment and act as a support system to every single individual no matter what, why would his grandson come to shed more blood and to kill and to butcher and to massacre? What I'm saying here is there is a movement which is happening, and the movement is an empathic movement. It's a movement which advances forward, where religion all of a sudden is not an imposed force, but an inner reality, where that a child and a youth understand, I don't do things simply because others tell me or because God tells me, but I do them because I see benefits being reaped from this system. That's the beauty of the system. And hence the early Arabians, when they came to the Messenger of Allah, some people say that the Arabians loved the Messenger for his beauty and his looks. If that was true, then they should have followed him in his 20s when he was the most beautiful. Can we not say that? He was the most handsome. What did the early Arabians fall in love with? Did they fall in love with the akhlaq of the Messenger? He was kind to even Abu Sufyan and to others, but they still stabbed him in the back. What was it that attracted people to the message of Islam? And in all honesty, what attracted people to the message was nothing to do with the messenger. Yes, he portrayed it in the most beautiful way. Yes, he brought people closer to it because of his beautiful akhlaq. But there was something so distinct and powerful and moving about the message that the people simply could not resist. Specifically certain groups, when you have a society where women are bought and sold on a market, where women are inherited as slaves, where women are not even given basic human rights, when you have a man who comes forward and says, no, they cannot be sold and bought, no, they cannot be treated as slaves, no, they need to be given their rights, and on top of that says, heaven is underneath the feet of the mother, you know why society changes at that point. You know why society moves forward. There's a beauty to the religion of Islam which is so much more, so much past the very banner that we see of Islam. What I mean to say by this is, and I raise this question sometimes, take a look at Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When we say religion is not an imposition, and we say that it's an inner reality, what we're trying to say is, instead of saying there is an Islam which is imposed on people, we're saying there is a human system of movement which rewards and gives benefit to every good-doing human being on this earth. Basic example. Take a look at our hadith which says that if a person gives charity today, God rewards them. God gives them a longer life. That exists in our hadith today. Today there are studies coming out from many different universities, prominent universities, that even atheists, non-Muslims, any individual on earth who has given charity, and there was a study done on this, their lives were seen to increase by an average of 5 years. What that says to me is, instead of looking others from a very judgmental standpoint, from a very religiously imposed standpoint, we are here to say that there is a humanity that exists inside each and every one of us. And that when Allah says there is a system of Islam, this is not an exclusive system for the Muslims, but it's a system for all of humanity. Humanity is not only explained as a religion, but it's a general lifestyle. It's a human system. And hence there are studies done today that even when a non-Muslim gives charity, God rewards them by increasing their lives. And what that says to me is that there is a system on earth which exists whereby you and I interact and we move forward. Let me give a brief example of this. Going back to the verse that I started off with, Allah said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهِ. Those who take other than Islam as a religion, I will not accept from you. Now, there's some different tafsirs about this. One tafsir says that anybody who does not take the religion of Islam, and the reason I bring this is because there is a vision that Islam is exclusive. It is for a specific group, and this allows us to be judgmental at times. What I want to show is that there is no exclusivity to the religion of Islam, but there is an inclusive message. When we look at this verse, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهِ. Those who take other than Islam as a religion, I will not accept from them. Some look at this verse and say that what Allah means by this is, if you take other than Islam as a religion, I will look away from you, I won't accept from you. Any different religion or any individual who does any act, God doesn't accept from them. There's a second viewpoint which says no. When Allah speaks about acceptance and rejection in this verse, God will not accept from them. God doesn't mean that if you do a good deed and you're not part of the Muslim club, I'll look away from you, I won't accept from you. But God is saying in this very verse that there is no system of acceptance or rejection whereby God says, I accept or I reject from you. But what God is saying is, when you follow the human system, which is the religion of Islam, you will see the most benefit to yourself. You will see the most growth as a human being. And God has nothing to do with accepting or rejecting, because He is infinite, as we said. Now all of a sudden what this verse says is, it's not that God is saying, I told you to do your homework on lined paper. If you do your homework on an iPad, I won't accept from you, I'm going to look away. I don't want it. Is God that petty? Does God see things that way? Or is God telling us in this verse that no, it's not about me accepting or rejecting from you. If you do a good deed as a human being and you see benefit and growth, then you see benefit and growth. I am not accepting or rejecting from you as a human being. Because at the end of the day, the goal of humanity, the general goal of religion, is for individuals to grow in that pathway. Now, some might say, well, why Islam? Why is Islam the general principle of movement forward? Because Islam as a system has the most complete set of laws and rules and regulations to move society forward. This is the same religion which took a group of people who were in the most nomadic state, who were burying their children, and moved them forward to such a level where chemistry and math and sciences were being produced from that very area. But it's sad to say that today, if you look at the world, 50% of all scientific advancements have been discovered within the past 50 years or 70 years. Things like genetics, which we study now in university, was never even existent 50 years ago. Matter of fact, the book from 2 years ago is so drastically different from the books this year that some people look back and say, wow, our world is really changing. And the question that we ask is, the same system which at one point changed a group of people, molded them and moved them forward, and made them advance in chemistry and sciences and other areas, where is that system today? These past scientific discoveries have been made by the USA, by North America, by England, by the UK, by Europe and other countries in Europe. Where are we from this modern advancement? What's happened to us where we have become stagnant? Perhaps, we've seen our religion as an exclusive cap, whereby we are the chosen ones, and everyone else in our society is doomed or damned. And what we're trying to say here is that no, if a person does deeds or good deeds, they reap the benefit from their deeds. Hence some of our hadith come forward and say that even the companions of Imam Mahdi, many of them will be non-Muslims. Because sometimes we think there is an exclusivity even to our Imam Mahdi, Ajallahu ta'ala farjah al-sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. But many tell us that no, our imams' companions, many of them will be non-Muslims. Because imagine you have a Muslim who is stingy and a non-Muslim who is kind. The non-Muslim who is kind and who is not stingy and who is willing to give will benefit the Imam much more than the Muslim who is stingy. That's why the Messenger comes with quite a profound hadith. He says the non-Muslim king who is unkind to his people is worse than the Christian king who is kind to his people. What does that highlight? It's highlighting an inclusivity to our religion. There is no one specific group of people which are saved, but there is a humanity. And hence Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he's on the plains of Karbala, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, you'll find where our narrations, you'll find where our narrations discuss a person like Wahab, for example, who's lying on the sands of Karbala, or a person like John. There is no mention of them reciting Shahada. Matter of fact, when we go back in our hadith, Wahab never converted to the religion of Islam. There is no such conversion or Shahada being recited. What does this highlight? It's highlighting that there is something so much deeper at stake here than simply the banner of a person being Muslim. That Imam Hussein comes to John on the day of Ashura and says to him, may Allah brighten your face. May Allah put you with the Messenger of Allah Muhammad. And the same is said to Wahab. Even though these two are non-Muslims, they are Christians, and there was no conversion to be seen in Karbala. History doesn't record any conversions. What this says to me is there is something so much greater here. And there is such a deeper reality than the banner of Islam. And sometimes I ask a question here. Take a look at Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Hussein ibn Ali, is he not our life vein? Is he not our jugular vein? Is he not the movement which sparks all movements? Is he not the one who has inspired millions? As we look at Karbala, we see 21 to 25 million people visiting annually. Is he not that same person? What if Hussein ibn Ali was the same Hussein ibn Ali, did the same great things, moved in the same positive manner, changed and died and was killed on this very same motives and the same principles, but he was not under the banner of Islam? Would we see Hussein ibn Ali the same way? Would we accept Hussein ibn Ali the same way? Or would we see him very differently? What I'm trying to say here is, do we follow Hussein simply because he's a Muslim under the banner of Islam? Or do we see a deeper understanding of what Islam and religion is meant to be? Have we seen the deeper Hussein ibn Ali? Or have we seen a very superficial, shallow vision of what Hussein is? When I was in Iraq last December, I swear to you, when I was walking towards Imam Hussein from Najaf to Karbala, I saw young children, 5, 6, 7, 8. I asked them, what are you doing this for? They say Hussein. But when you investigate further, they don't know who he is. They don't know what kind of person he was. Some of them don't even know the history behind him because they're young children. But they are kind. One child holds onto my leg and says, you're not going anywhere. I said, why? I have to go. He says, you're not going. And he starts to cry. He says, my father wants every person to come and eat inside the house. There are people who, when you walk, massage your feet. These are people who very normally would never do such a thing. You're in a war-ravaged country. You're in a country where people can't even find their next meal that they have. You're in a country where people take half their life savings, some of them all their life savings, and they put it simply on this mawqif to feed and to serve the Zawar of Abu Abdullah. You'll come to a young child, say to him, who was Hussein? He'll say, he's right there. He'll point very far to the shrine of Imam alayhi salam, but he won't know who he is, but he'll give you food. He'll be kind to you. He'll massage your feet. He'll sweep the floor. He'll be kind to every single individual that walks there. He's got no idea what Hussein is, but he knows there's some sort of goodness in Hussein that he has to follow him. What we're saying is, are we following the banner of a Muslim Hussein, or are we following the principles of universal goodness that Hussein is displaying and showing us? That's the real question. And when you're in Karbala and you're walking to see certain individuals, you're shocked and surprised to see that these are individuals who don't even know where the next meal is coming from, but they're willing to take their whole life savings and put it for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. That's quite a movement. That's quite the ability for such a poor group of people. And to look past that, people who have been ravished for 35 years by a dictator, whose brother, whose mother, whose sister, whose son, whose daughter have been killed or kidnapped. Every single family you might see probably has lost a couple of family members. People who emotionally are so torn, but have the most positive attitude in serving Imam Hussein. What a profound message. And you think to yourself, what's stemming all of this? What's moving all of this? Is it simply because Hussein has a name and a banner? It's much greater than that. There is a goodness which Imam Hussein displayed, which these people are attracted to. The same way when we see the messenger, his message was what really attracted people and changed them. Hussein ibn Ali is the same way. His universal message, the qualities of universal goodness, the qualities which he displayed are what moved people and what's moving the masses today. Now that's a profound way to see goodness in Imam Hussein alayhi salam. There is no longer an exclusivity, Hussein is my Hussein. There is no longer only this person can accept Imam Hussein, but there is a inclusivity. Hussein is for everyone. His morals and messages of goodness are for everyone, and hence that's the way we should be today. This is why when the Messenger of Allah was dying, he was on his deathbed, it was not that there were only Muslims next to him. Non-Muslims adored him. Christians and Muslims alike adored him. And I always remember the story of Rasulullah, quite a heartbreaking story, of that woman, the Jewish woman who would throw garbage on him every day. Now we hear this all the time, but to be put in that situation, it's quite a situation, where she throws garbage on him every single day. Look at the acceptance. Look at the lack of judgment. Look at the support system that he gives every single individual. Where are we from that? Where is my religion in the way that I impose it on others? Where am I from that? And he goes towards her on that day where she doesn't throw any garbage on him. And he knocks on her door, and he brings her food, he brings her water, and she says to him, you came to visit me. He says to her, yes, because you didn't throw garbage. Where are you? What's happening? Are you okay? Can I help you in a way? And she breaks into tears and she accepts the religion of Islam. Now that's a profound message. Another woman who the Messenger of Allah walks with, and he takes her load and he carries it for her. And she's cursing the name of Muhammad, not knowing the one who's carrying her load is Muhammad. And she walks with him and she curses and curses and curses and curses. And she gets near the house and she says to him, young man, you've helped me so much. What's your name? He says to her, my name is Muhammad. And she is surprised. You are the Muhammad. This is a Jewish woman. This is a non-Muslim. But the patience that he has with her, the level of acceptance, that when you and I sit here and shed tears over the Messenger of Allah and his death, which was quite a saddening death, remember the time where he was the most non-judgmental human being, where he was a human being who was accepting of everyone, that when he's dying, his head is in the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. His head is inside the lap of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he looks around at his family, at his daughter Fatima alayhi salam. He looks around at Al-Hassan, at Al-Hussein, and he's surrounded by his family members. I say, Ya Rasulullah, on that day when you died, your head was in the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But your grandson Abu Abdullah, when he died, in whose lap was his head? In whose lap was the head of Abu Abdullah when he was dying? As you know, Ali al-Akbar, the son of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, was known to be the one who looked like the messenger of Allah, khalqan wa khuluqan, through looks and through actions. That on that day in Ashura, when Ali al-Akbar was laying down on the sands of Karbala, Abu Abdullah alayhi salam races towards his son Ali al-Akbar. He takes the head of Ali al-Akbar, he puts it in his lap, and he starts to wipe the blood from his face. He says to him, my dear son Ali, I wish your father can help you more than he is doing now. Imam Hussein sees Ali al-Akbar laughing, and then he sees him smiling. He says to him, my dear son Ali, why do I see you smile and why do I see you cry? He says to him, Father Abu Abdullah, I smile because I see Rasulullah. I see him bringing me a cup of water. And I cry because I see Lady Fatima sitting next to me. She is looking at my wounds, and she is looking at your face, and she is saying, Wa walada Husayna. Ali al-Akbar, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at that point looks at his companions that are remaining. He says to them, bring me a small cloth. I can put the body pieces of Ali al-Akbar on that cloth. For every time I lift one side, another side falls. When I lift that other side, the other one falls. Imam Hussein alayhi salam takes Ali al-Akbar and he puts him inside the tent next to Al-Qasim. Now this is a heartbreaking scenario. You have a father sitting next to his son and to his nephew, and he's sitting in between them. One second he looks at Ali al-Akbar, and the next second he looks at Al-Qasim. He says to them, my dear sons, your uncle is in sorrow and your father is in sorrow that he could not help you more than he did. Lady Zainab comes into that tent. She says to him, Abu Abdullah, can you exit the tent? The mother of Ali al-Akbar wants to come and see her son. Layla, the mother of Ali, walks into that tent and she throws her body on her son Ali al-Akbar. She says to him, my dear sons, I had plans to see you married and I wanted you to bury me when I die. Lady Zainab sat next to her crying over the body of Ali al-Akbar. She was thinking that the caretaker of Layla, Ali al-Akbar, has died, but where is my caretaker Abbas? On that day when Imam Hussein died and the women were left alone to be carried on the camels, Lady Zainab looks at her sister Kulthum. She says to her sister Kulthum, why don't you ride the camel first? I will help you. Lady Kulthum looks at her sister Zainab, if I ride, who will help you ride the camel? She looks at her and she looks towards the river of Al-Furat and she says that the one who is on the river without arms will come and help me today. She says to him, Ya Abbas, man talli jibtni, wallah bidak ya khuya rakabtni. Brother, were you not the one who brought me from Medina? So why don't you come now and take me back, Ya Abbas? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا على محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين يا الله. Let's raise our hands towards dua. Many have asked us to pray for them. We have many who are sick in this community and other communities around the world. We recite Amani Juba 5 times and Ya Allah together 11 times in our loudest of voices, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء 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 يا الله 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 والله heal all of our sick ones يا الله اللهم اقضي جميع حوائجنا يا الله make us leaders in our communities يا الله وارواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات نقرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها الصلوات